I've been a huge fan of Anya Taylor-Joy for years, and when you're a big fan of someone you find to be immensely talented, it's easy to be intrigued in the things they do or find interesting. When people are talented and great at their craft, I find that I respect their opinions a lot more than I would of the average person. There's a certain level of respect you get for their recommendations, most certainly because there's a value to their aptitude, and there's a good chance that their expertise will correlate with some good tastes. Take for instance your favorite basketball player. If they tweet out a glowing post about an up-and-coming young player, you're probably likely going to start having your eye on that new player. Or maybe there's a YouTuber you love, and they're trying out a new game that they sing praises for.
Excited today to be checking out Paria. This is a new indie WarioWare-inspired game where, the way I understand it, the game changes every 10 seconds. Is it controller-driven?
So when Anya first posted an Instagram story about reading a book during quarantine, of course I got interested, especially as a writer and an avid reader. There's a pretty big list of books that she read over the course of the last year, so I'm going to emphasize that for this video, I'm only going to take a look at 3 of them because there's just way too many books to read. So I'm sorry if I don't mention one of the books that she read that you find to be better than any of the ones on my personal recommended list. And yes, I know quarantine is just about over here in the United States, but that doesn't mean we can't read anymore, right? This is going to be a fairly spoiler-free review of the novels I'm going to recommend, and hopefully, you'll find them just as interesting and masterful as I did. With that being said, let's take a look at 3 of the best books that Anya Taylor-Joy read during her quarantine. Before I talk about 20 love poems and a song of despair, I'm going to make a note that this book is probably going to set the tone for what you're going to see in the rest of the books in this video, since they all deal with some facets of romance. Maybe that says something about my personal tastes, but looking at the rest of the books on Anya's list, I think it probably says a lot more about Anya's genre tastes than mine. Or maybe I just wanted to convince myself of that. Anyway, 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair is a very short collection of romantic poems written by the legendary and highly influential Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. I'm going to open this up by saying that I'm not actually a very big fan of poetry, even to the point of disliking probably 90% of the poetry I read in my 3 different required college poetry courses. So the fact that I'm recommending this collection speaks volumes for the quality of Neruda's work. I particularly commend the way he can draw vivid images that are so intense that you can actually feel them. For example, one line that comes to mind is, "Sometimes a piece of sun burned like a coin between my hands." I always stress this in my videos, and I'll say it again. I find all forms of art to be successful and powerful if they're able to evoke specific emotions out of you. And Neruda's incredibly descriptive metaphors truly do evoke feelings of longing, of romance, of love, and even of loss. Sometimes the metaphors and the language can get away from you and can become quite cryptic, yes. But part of the fun of poetry is dissecting those symbols, those metaphors, those images, and those hidden meanings so you could relate them to your own experiences. 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair is a passionate collection of poems with a trance-like cadence. And if I were to describe these poems in one word, it would be beautiful. If you've ever loved someone, I think you can find and appreciate something great in this book. And if you're able to experience even a sliver of that tender romantic emotion that this book evokes, I think that you'll find this to be a worthwhile recommendation. Raymond Carver is widely considered to be one of the greatest American short story writers, and it's for a good reason. What we talk about when we talk about love is a collection of some of those amazing short stories, known best for their minimalistic and realistic style. Again, I wouldn't call myself a big fan of romantic stories, but I'm not sure if I can really call this a short story collection of romantic stories at all. But in a way, they all feature an element of romance in them, even if they get dark and twisted along the way. Lots of the stories deal with alcohol and alcoholism, with adultery, with relationships that don't end well, and most of the time, they emphasize moments in people's lives that are dark and morbid and depressing. That isn't to say that none of the stories are uplifting, because in fact, it's not about being uplifting, it's about being honest. And all these stories are actually really honest at their core, and that's what makes them powerful and not just sad for the sake of being sad. And emphasizing this realism is far more relatable than having 50 short stories about people being in love with zero hang-ups. These stories point out the complicated aspects of love and relationships, and they represent microcosms of experiences that either we or the people we know face at some point in their lives, such as being estranged with our loved ones, with being envious of others, with falling out of love, and much more. And, beyond just the thematic content of these stories, the way that they're told is masterfully done, and that combination makes them a complete joy to read. Each story is short, sweet, and punchy, and they often end in an open-ended way that leaves you thinking about them long after they've finished. One of my favorites from the collection is Why Don't You Dance?, which is a story about this old dude who seems to be selling all of his possessions at a yard sale. And while he drinks, a young couple stops by to buy some furniture for their new apartment. There's a slight oddness and creepiness to the story that I won't spoil, but what I love about the story is its implications and its parallelism. While the man seems to be trying to start a new life by ridding himself of possessions he once shared with his past partner, the couple is conversely trying to build upon their life by buying these possessions for their new home. It puts some perspective on the timeline of love and what might happen when it ends, and what this old man is doing in the story might very well be something that the couple may do in their future if they break up. The book ends with the titular story, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, and it's a fitting and thematic story to end the book on, as it covers the complex notions of love, of loving others, of falling out of love, of gaining new love, of defining what love is and what love isn't, and how love may be different between different people. It's a great collection filled with a multitude of different stories you might like, and even if you don't find some of them to be that appealing, at the very least they end quite quickly, which is a huge plus. So pick up the book wherever you can, because it's worth it. James Baldwin was and is a world-renowned writer and activist, whose inspirational contributions to the civil rights movement, gay liberation movement, and so many other political movements and ideas urging for social change cannot be understated. His bibliography as a whole should be recommended for his deep explorations and reflections on racial, sexual, and class distinctions in the United States and in the Western world at large. But for the purposes of this video's restrictions, I'm recommending Giovanni's Room, and it is without a doubt one of the best novels that Anya has read during this last year. It's a story about a queer American man living in Paris, particularly focusing on his complicated feelings towards having intimate relationships with other men, most notably a man named Giovanni, who he meets at a gay bar. Before I go any further, I do have to note that it's a heavy, emotionally draining book with wonderfully constructed prose that is meant to make you feel extremely and uncomfortably constricted, which is reflective of the story it tells. It's a genius way to make you feel the way that the main character David does, with its harsh descriptions of walls caving in, of choking, thick air, and of tiny, cramped, disheveled rooms, not to mention being set in a foreign culture you may not be able to understand. It's a story that ruminates on the complexities of sexuality and love. And to go further than that, it's a story that dives deep into the different facets of masculinity, femininity, identity, gender norms, and so much more. It's important to be able to empathize with and understand the persecution and fear that members of the LGBTQIA+ community face due to social rules, pressures, expectations, and norms. Not only that, but the persecution that people face from actual punitive political policies as well. Giovanni's Room is a story that navigates prejudices that afflict our community that have far-reaching effects in our society, and consequently, prejudices that can even be self-inflicted due to social expectations. Use this engaging story to widen your perspective, because at its core, it is an intelligent, well-written piece of writing that should and will make an impact on you. And if you're looking for mastery of the English language, this is it. I know this was a rather short video, and those of you who are subscribed to my channel probably aren't used to this kind of content. But as a reminder, I make videos about all things writing related. So if you aren't subscribed yet and you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you wish to see more. I'd really appreciate it, and it lets me know what kind of content you would all like to see. I'd also like to give a special thanks to my patrons, or in this case, my single patron Edith Lopez Torres, for helping support me in making more of these videos. If you'd like to support me as well, I'll leave a link down in the description. You'll get your name credited in future videos amongst many other perks as well, such as voting for future content, which I should mention that this video was voted for on Patreon. Lastly, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video all the way to the end, and for that, I appreciate your support too. Check out my other videos if you'd like, and have a great rest of your day.